Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, President of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. She was the first woman president of FICCI, which we celebrated a year ago, about to complete her term in December. So we'll talk to her about her experiences in FICCI in these trying times when the economy was stagnant, inflation was high, there didn't seem to be any hope on the horizon, but things are changing. We'll talk about that. Welcome to our show, Ms. Kidwai. So, there are some signs of green shoots in the economy. Could you tell us how you view it from your end? You know, what feedback are you getting from the industry?
Well, I should differentiate that in terms of one is clearly there is a change of perception. The change of perception is reflecting in the stock market and the buoyancy therein. The analysts that write about India, the numbers, as in the current account deficit in particular, which had caused such a fright.
Which was a big reversal, current account deficit.
And, you know, you would actually question if it were that easy that in 2 to 3 months you could actually bring it back, why we hadn't done it earlier, but the fact is, yes, that's
Are we all wrong in analyzing the CAD?
Or have acted. I'm really saying, you know, acted in a manner that we didn't reach the point of crisis where we acted thereafter. However, from industry at the moment, which is really the barometer of is industry in a mood to invest, the manufacturing sector is still a huge issue. We are not seeing a huge return of investment, and there's a lot of watch and wait type of thinking. However, given that the mood changes, I'm sure that in time we will see this happen as well. For it, there are also actions that will need to be taken because manufacturing is an issue in terms of investment. However, having said that, there are sectors that clearly do very well.
So there are some green shoots.
Most certainly. We are seeing it in exports, where to some extent driven by, of course, the weakening of the rupee. But I think also the focus that we began to give exports in view of the current account deficit where it was, the fact that at the end of the day around us in some areas like textiles, there was a demand to manufacture more in India as there was a shift from Bangladesh, shift from China. And we have been able to some extent to pick up on some of these cycles as well.
Are you saying that we are doing better in exports across the board, this double-digit growth?
I think the double-digit growth has come back is very heartening. And it tells me that we have at the end of the day a manufacturing competitiveness in India which can withstand international competition. And it is important for us to continue to focus on them. We've always done well in software exports, and that sector remains very buoyant. It has indeed carried growth for India over many years and will continue to do so. And it does benefit to some extent from the weakening.
Because a year ago there was so much export pessimism. We were all, in fact, we were assuming that our competitiveness is all gone.
So to some extent the rupee has helped, but I think the return of markets in Europe where there's certain buoyancy returning, the US where it's certainly returning, which were our traditional large markets, is also helping some of that drive. And the world continues to look at different supply points, geographic diversity. India will always be an important point. We still have a lot to do here. We need to still clean up the infrastructure that we have in terms of, for export, you need better roads, better ports, you know, all the things that we've been crying for over the last decade, which are still not world class.
What about recent assurances from the finance minister that pipeline investments, especially in infrastructure, getting cleared, and he's been quoting numbers. Where do we stand there?
Well, I take a lot of heart from the fact that we did see the clearances coming to the Cabinet Committee of Investments. However, the execution of those projects has probably taken longer than I had hoped, in that they still take time coming out through the ministries and then going back into the zone where the machinery is actually being cranked up, and we are seeing the sectors that were impacted, which would largely be power and roads moving ahead. Roads are still, I think, a bit disappointing, but power has been an interesting story. I was looking at the numbers for September, and we see that the power sector is up to, in terms of growth, 12.3%, and thermal power 17%, which tells me that coal is finally actually coming through, enabling our power sector, which was really stuck for those linkages.
Coal is also growing at double digit. I'm told it's close to double digit. It used to be 0% until last year.
Yeah.
But now coal supplies, production has picked up.
And so that has the added advantage. So one is that all these projects that were stuck because of the coal linkages and supply, they're beginning to crank in, and we're actually seeing power go up, which is great. And in fact, the expectation is that we will see electricity growth over the next few months at over 10%, which is a really good.
That's why the core sector growth is showing up 7-8% growth, the latest numbers.
Yeah, and it's being driven largely by, I think, by the power sector.
By the power sector.
The other side, of course, of coal, which you mentioned, is the advantage we get is that imports, which had gone up multifold, almost to $20 billion from a traditional 6 to 8 billion, can come back to a level of 6 to 8 billion, because what is the point of importing large coal when we have,
then
as we do have?
You might have a current account surplus after that if you do that. Yeah.
We could. And the fact that we have amongst the third largest coal deposits in the world, if we cannot use it at times like this when the country needs it, what a shame. And we have to do it in a balanced way. We have to do it in an environment-friendly way. But the world mines coal, and maybe it's a little more expensive than the way we have done it, in that there are rules that have to be observed, and we have to, put the forest back, and we have to ensure that we don't deface and ruin as we go along. But we do need to ensure that the advantages we have in country are also availed of.
I think that is a real question which really nobody addressed, not the environment ministry or other ministries, as to how to do it in a way that you reforest and the way you other countries do it.
Absolutely. And I've seen pictures in Germany where they still mine coal, and you know how environment conscious they are. And in fact, you look at the area which had been mined, it looks better than the area which was not, because the way the reforestation happens, the biodiversity is adhered to. So yes, it's a cost. So I would say
it will increase the cost, but then it's well worth it.
And it's still going to be cheaper than importing coal.
Cheaper than importing coal.
And that is the way for us to go.
Yeah. We'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a very interesting conversation with the President of FICCI, Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, on the state of the economy and on whether green shoots are indeed showing up and there's some hope on the horizon. Ms. Kidwai, you are indeed rightly talking about how if we fully exploit our coal reserves in the right environmentally friendly way, as other countries do in the West, we can indeed push up growth further and maybe reduce our current account deficit also, because we're paying so much for import of coal. Now, this process, are you sort of confident that that this process has begun and we'll indeed be able to finish it in the next 6 months or so? Because this is not some new project; these are all pipeline projects, right? Yeah. So do you think that it's happening?
Well, I think a lot needs to continue to be done to make them happen, because while the Cabinet Committee of Investments has cleared a large number of these projects, and some have gone through almost 150 desks in the ministry and are still doing the rounds, those need to emerge. But there are very serious issues at times where those projects hit state level issues. In fact, we had a number of workshops here in FICCI where people like Mr. Swaroop, who is actually charged with this responsibility, heard some of the issues. And not all are in the control of the center. But the good news is, whether state or center, the ability to get these projects through lies in our hands. This is not now about a big parliamentary process. It is not about any external economic environment issue. It is to do with us.
It's up to us.
And it's up to us, and it is about executing.
And what about, every once in a while, some ongoing coal investigation, CBI comes in and does something, and we waste about a couple of weeks for that to get reversed. The Prime Minister comes in and says, no, these coal clearances are very much in order. Now, these institutional issues, do you feel that they are slowly getting sorted out, although they are creating problems politically, but do you think by and by, with elections around the corner, they'll get sorted out?
It's not obvious to me that it gets sorted out, because just as everything looked like it was finally getting unclogged, we had this
we had this googly from the CBI
googly again, which I think was quite unfortunate, because it creates not just issues around coal, but our fear from FICCI was that it raises issues around how government and the bureaucracy continues to function going forward, because it puts them in a situation where every decision taken, well-meaning and indeed, even to reverse a decision can't be wrong if it is the right decision. And I think the real issue around this lies in transparency, that unfortunately, because of the opaqueness of decision making in the past, we are paying the price today. And if the process was seen as being open and transparent, and a decision taken is defensible, FICCI has also submitted that we do believe that an auction process is a fair and good process, but it's not the only way for resource allocation either. And there are times when you have to ensure that there is, proximity to resources and so on and so forth, which can be applied as a reason to allow growth to happen. So I think this particular case that you're alluding to is important for us to analyze in terms of how we could have done it differently so that we don't have this problem at every level.
At every level.
Yeah, at the level where the decision was reversed and documented, and maybe you just declare there that we have done it. Yeah.
Ms. Kidwai, people are raising another very interesting question today. Just the way PM openly came out and defended the coal allocation to Kumar Birla, and very well, why couldn't he do it for most cases, except the ones where there are some irregularities which the investigation agencies can look at? So the bulk of, whether it's coal or whether it's spectrum, why couldn't the Prime Minister just come out and say, like he did in this case, yes, these were bona fide allocations, and those which are mala fide are being investigated? Do you think some clarity of this kind could have come earlier?
Well, it must lie at every minister where there's a question, should be able to defend that decision. And I think we have to ensure that this very high decibel political discussion that happens, and every time there is an issue, it becomes a political storm. So the intelligent decision making that may happen also gets questioned because it's politicized. Yeah, and in the world of business, a lot of decisions are taken which are very nuanced. Only time tells whether they were right or wrong. But when they were taken, and we take several decisions every day, we have no way of knowing that they're going to turn out right. But if they're taken in the right spirit, with the right inputs, and with a view to the progress of the country in this case, then that must be the right decision. But I do think that on transparency, we could do better. I also think it's time to really relook at the way our regulatory mechanisms work, because the lesson I would draw from this is there's no need for government to be in the decision making for some of these things. Why can't the process be one of independent regulators who then play the role rather than government as owner,
so you're saying the government
and government as regulator
itself,
being one? Yeah, government can insulate itself
from the politics of it also,
and it insulates the country, frankly, from the politics of it, so that the decision making is made in a transparent manner through a body in which industry has a vested interest, because industry has a vested interest in that body has a view. So the right regulator, to my mind, is one that has a view and vision for the industry over the next 20 years, the health of the industry, while keeping the consumer in mind. If that regulator only rules for the consumer and gives you zero power and zero price power or zero coal, then you have an issue, because that industry will die in the next 3 to 5 years. So how we staff our regulators, how the regulator sees their role, and the way we regulate our industries and distance it from a process which is political in nature, or even if it's not, has the danger of getting politicized because it has emanated from the Ministry of Government.
So you're saying that we should have had a coal regulator, an independent coal regulator doing all these allocations and processes.
And an independent, as in it can't be answerable to the ministry.
Answerable to the parliament, actually. There's a big debate around whether independent regulators, even if you support independent regulators taking all these decisions, should they be answerable to parliament? Like most people say, they should be answerable to parliament, because all these are public resources.
Yeah, it depends on the resource. You can't have every regulator there.
Water,
and some are very technical issues.
Some are technical, So, but generally, do you support the idea of regulators being independent, but answerable to Parliament like the US system has it. You know, the Senate
Yeah.
committees, various regulators go before the Senate committee and explain their position.
I think this whole area of how a regulator works is all about how you first secure the independence of the regulator.
Yeah.
And if the rules are clear, it can be independent even as it reports to a ministry.
Yeah.
And we have in the financial sector had very good regulators, RBI and SEBI, which have demonstrated their independence, and the engagement is there with the respective ministries, but without being answerable to them, they are answerable only to ensuring the health of the banking sector or the health of the capital markets.
Consumers and producers as
So we've already got these examples before us, and these are not regulators that are answerable to, you know, Parliament or whatever, because you do not want to find very technical subjects going in front of standing committees in areas which are so technical that you know, they don't even necessarily want to be engaged, and you're forcing them to be engaged. So I think the answers will lie in different ways to do it, but setting the regulation, the law, and staffing it with the right people would be one.
That's the most critical aspect.
And the transparency that arises from that.
We'll take a small break here and continue this discussion. Please stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, President of FICCI. You know, one of the things that industry was really hoping for, not now, for the past 6 months, was some sort of positive uplift in sentiment coming from the RBI in the form of cut in interest rates. Now, Raghuram Rajan generated a lot of optimism. How do you assess his first two credit policy statements?
Yeah. So if you look at where industry sits on this, there's a deep desire to see the interest rate at which industry borrows to come down. And I make this distinction between a repo rate hike and the rate of interest rates that a company pays, because even while we saw repo rates come off over the last 18 months, in fact, our surveys have shown that the rate at which companies borrowed actually went up. So
can you explain this simply? How does this happen?
Well,
are you saying that the RBI rates don't get transmitted to the real world?
Yes,
or what?
So they don't get transmitted because banks have other issues. It could be liquidity, and so by injecting liquidity in the system, which is what the governor has done by virtue of reducing the MSF, keeping an eye on liquidity. If you have more money available, interest rates do come down. So if liquidity is tight because government is borrowing more or is sucking money out of the system, you would inevitably get interest rates remaining high. So it's not just about repo rate. And in fact, the aligning of the MSF and the repo rate, which is what was sought to be done in this last monetary policy, was a direction which the governor set. And in fact, the no surprises fact of it is also very good, because when markets don't like shocks or inconsistent behavior. So the fact that the signaling was perfect, what has happened is what was predicted to happen.
Expecting a hike in repo rate.
Oh, absolutely, 25 basis point repo rate, that's what happened. MSF reduction 25 basis point, that's what happened. Bring the LAF corridor to within 100 happened. So that's the positive. So the issue right now is all our surveys here show that the single biggest negative factor still in the minds of industry, and these are various manufacturing companies that we surveyed, interest rates are still the highest factor given for not investing. So 56%, for example, was the reason given was interest rates.
Among SMEs particularly?
All, so it's SME and large. And 53% were lack of domestic demand. So I'm saying domestic demand is an issue, and that you would expect. If you're not investing, because you don't have the demand. But interest rates were seen as higher weightage.
Was it the highest weightage factor?
Yes, and has been so. So we do need to get the interest rates.
Did you convey this to the RBI?
Oh, yes, and the surveys, and reiterated it, and I've personally handed over the reports to the governor. So, and he understands it, and believe me, he is pro-growth. He understands the issue, and I do believe he's right in also highlighting that in the long run, if we can't get inflation down, that hurts industry too. After all, our input costs go up margins reduce, we do have to get inflation down as well. And it is that old issue of how do you balance inflation and growth. So getting interest rates down is the wish of industry. It is something which is going to have to be watched carefully, because the health of our banks and NPAs therein, if they mount, no matter what you do with bringing repo rates down, your interest rates are not going to go down. So it's the combination of factors of how the bank gets liquidity, what the repo rate is, and its NPAs, which are going to determine how the bank charges its
It's interesting when you speak about the health of banks, because the RBI recently released some data which they shared with informally with some of the editors, which showed that if you included the restructured assets contained in the bank balance sheets, and if you included them as part of NPAs, then the NPAs have actually hit some figures of 11%, 12% of the outstanding assets. So, and a lot of this has been caused because of the infrastructure sector, I'm told. A lot of NPAs in the power sector, etc. Now,
roads.
Yeah, roads. Now, where are we headed in this respect? Because the RBI governor says that these sectors, once policy logjams are cleared, they will start fructifying into projects. So then they will automatically come down. So is it that serious, or is it temporary?
So I would say the beauty of this is that at the end of the day, there is a demand for power, there is a demand for roads. We need these projects. In fact, the multiplier effect of these projects is enormous. So these are not projects that are dead-ended. Sometimes you just have projects which they're just in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing.
Even there are huge demand for it.
Yes. So it is about sorting out policy. And I do believe that if we can ensure that this last mile that needs to happen, in some cases, we were getting examples, for example, of projects where the railroad was built except for the last 30 kilometers. But if you don't give that rail connectivity, there's no way of evacuating product from that factory. So you close the gap and suddenly that project is fine. So working on this project by project, which is what the Cabinet Committee of Investments sought to do, is the right way. We have to put a lot more focus on the execution of these projects down the line, and we have to allow our banks the ability to stay with these projects, because if we now overreact and start suggesting that these projects all be NPA'd, then their ability to fund these projects, because after all they're also answerable to others and to shareholders, becomes an issue. So we are at the point where to turn the tap off is an issue. Now, if there's a willful defaulter, which is what the governor has said.
So how do you distinguish that? Then you have to be CDR'd, corporate debt restructuring where,
But it's not impossible to find if a project is stuck because permissions ran awry. And that's the reason for the project having failed or not having delivered.
But do you believe that those projects where there is the genuine incompetence on the part of the promoters, they can come under CDR and managements should change while the loans are restructured? It can be brought under different managements?
Well, look, we actually have one of the poorest bankruptcy laws in the world. You look at the US, and I think one of the big advantages that the US has had and why entrepreneurship is so buoyant there is that the exit routes are open all the time. And your ability to get into Chapter 11 and 12 is, people get maybe declared individually bankrupt, but companies are allowed to repackage, reform and move on.
So you're saying this greater mobility of land, labor and capital?
Yes, and the ability to reset, which is what we don't have. So what you would get is a classic case here where something is going wrong. Everybody swoops like vultures onto this shrunken pie, which means everyone's going to get just 10-20% and you take your bit and the project's done with, as against working with the project to allow it to move ahead. We need a lot more asset reconstruction capabilities. And we need to be able to do this outside of the sort of traditional BIFR route, which we have had, which is very, very painful. And you really don't see much emerge from there. What should happen is a company, you take a case like Satyam when it happened. What you've got now is your fourth largest.
So why can't we have more of Satyam type of change of managements, right? So,
because we don't have the systems to do it. If Satyam had gone ahead the way it was going, which is that income tax was swooping in, freezing the bank accounts, the whole scare off to offshore markets was that Satyam was not going to be, you can't function with your bank accounts frozen. So that is why the timely action taken by the government and to set up a committee of people who had access back to the highest level, to the Prime Minister's office, to enable the accounts to be opened, as in business to continue as is, albeit under very tight umbrella. A reassurance is given at the highest level to customers abroad that the company was not going to fail. Actions at reassurance to your employees so that they don't run off. Acting quickly, acting in time, and making sure that all the different agencies of government didn't swoop in to pull the little bits and pieces they wanted. Saved the day. But we do not have that coordinated action.
thank you so much, Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.